What's up, guys? Today we're going to talk about spring snow. Now, hiking here in Colorado, you're going to have to get used to spring snow. It's something that will happen every year, and the level will change depending on the year that you're hiking in. So, when dealing with spring snow, we're going to talk in this video about some tips I have, some things to look out for, and some things to pay attention for when you're planning your trip before hitting the trail in the spring to go tackle those spring hikes. Now, before I start into this, this is by no means a replacement for any kind of avalanche training, but they're just helpful tips. With spring hiking, there's going to be two things to pay attention to: the snow above tree line and below it. The main difference between the two is that above tree line is typically going to be a bit more firm, a bit more predictable, and below tree line will usually be a bit more inconsistent and a bit more soft. The snow this time of year can really tell you a lot. So what I can see here is that there's clearly an established path here, and right now if I walk on it, it's pretty firm. But you can see over here that recently, who knows if it was yesterday, day before, or whatever, that the snow gets really soft. So this is just a kind of a good sign for you to look for when you're hiking in the snow still in the spring, to see kind of what conditions to expect on the way down, and also what time you should try to be off the mountain. So when that snow down there turns soft, you have no idea, right? Like, it's an impossible thing to guess, but you do know that it will turn that way eventually. And so the goal is to really get out there and finish early so you don't have to struggle through that. But what that also helps you do, if you have reports of it or pictures of it, is to decide what to pack. So if you see something like that, you might want to pack snowshoes, because if you're getting a later start, or if it just requires a longer day, you're probably going to be post-holing, which sucks. A pro tip in Treeline is to avoid what these things are. These are known as tree wells. Tree wells can be very deadly. Typically, the snow is usually warmer around the tree, and they can be very deep. If you ski or snowboard, you'll know that in areas like the Northwest, or anywhere that gets, like Japan, anywhere that gets a ton of powder, or even here when there's a big snowstorm, you avoid tree wells because they can be really dangerous. There's been stories of people falling into tree wells in during winter months and not being found until spring months, obviously dead. In terms of spring hiking, it's not that kind of a situation, but just in terms of trail finding, you typically want to avoid them, because otherwise you'll be knee deep in the snow. You're planning a trip above tree line, which in Colorado is basically anything above 12,000 feet. You got to really pay attention to a couple things. Number one, it's the temperature of the day of your hiking. Obviously, this time of year, it's typically going to be high 40s, maybe even hotter than that. There's a rare chance where it could be lower than that, but you also have to factor in the sun. Typically what I do is, like, if it's 35 this time of year, I'll add about 10-15 degrees, because that's what it's going to feel like. And then with the snow here, it'll reflect it back up at you. So yeah, anyway. But in terms of the snow, pay attention to the temperature the day of, then also look at the night before. What you want to look for the night before is anything below 30-ish degrees. And that'll be really important, because in most cases it'll create a hard freeze. What's a hard freeze? It's basically exactly what it sounds like. So you can see here that the top of this is pretty well frozen over. Now, we're only at like 11.5 right now, but I know that most likely this is going to be the same way up there, because this is at 11.5, it's an open field, which means it gets a lot of sun, and it still feels like that. Now, you can take a look over here and see that this will get soft eventually. So again, what I was saying earlier is, like, you want to get off the snow pretty early. Typically, I try to aim for like 10-11 at the very latest. You can obviously go past that, but it just means you're going to be probably post-holing and dealing with some less than ideal conditions. Now, when you're talking about the freeze overnight, the reason why it's important to pay attention to that is for a couple of things. Like I mentioned earlier, it's good for knowing what kind of gear to bring, but it's also really important for avalanches. So this time of year, what you typically will get 99% of the time is a wet slide avalanche. So what it essentially that's going on there is that the water from somewhere is melting underneath the snow, creating an unstable layer, and it's going to be shedding. So the reason you want to pay attention to that temperature and also start paying attention above tree line is because typically that's where most of these wet slab avalanches start, is above tree line. Now obviously they can come down into the trees, but typically you won't find something that's going to harm you like this low in elevation. So once you get above tree line, pay attention to that. And then obviously look at signs too. If I see any signs of wet slides today, I'll show you. If there hasn't been a hard freeze the night before, then I would avoid anything that's really prone to avalanches. So like a couloir or any kind of really avalanche prone terrain, which is anything above 35 to about the 45 range in terms of a degree. Or if you're gonna hit it, just hit it early and get off of it early. Because the worst thing would be if you're gonna hit something like that, starting late or, you know, getting up there and seeing that, oh crap, there's a ton of signs of wet slides, and having to make the decision to either, you know, potentially be unsafe or have to turn around after getting that high up. Spring avalanches, wet slabs or wet slides typically move pretty slow. So if you're paying attention, you're most likely not going to get caught off guard by one. Like you're not just going to like come in and have one take you off your feet. But they're still really dangerous because a wet slide can start to snowball and almost create like a snowball, you know, big ball type of effect. And if you're in a terrain where there's a cliff out, or there's lots of big boulders or rocks around you, you could get caught in it, especially if you're skiing or snowboarding, and be taken for a ride that you're not really prepared for and potentially get hurt that way. People typically talk about wet slides as being safer than a lot of the stuff that happens in the winter months because they're slow moving. But they still need to be, but they still need to be, you know, respected and paid attention to. Now that you know a little bit about the snow, let's talk about extra skills needed for spring hiking. A slope like this is a perfect example of why being able to self-arrest is important. Self-arresting is basically using your mountain axe to stop you if you fall on terrain like this. So there's tons of videos out there. You can go to classes on how to do it. It's a pretty basic skill, but it's very important to know because it could save your life for sure. Outside of self-arresting, glissading is a skill that's great to have as well. Glissading is basically sliding on your butt down the mountain. You can actually see a path of one that someone made right there. The reason why glissading is cool to know how to do is it'll save you a lot of extra hiking on the way down. So when I talk about glissading, it sounds pretty basic, but it's really important to have a mountain axe when you do it so that you have a brake in case you get too much speed or whatever. And it's also important to know how to position your feet. If you have crampons on, I would highly recommend taking micro spikes and crampons off before you do that. But really no class or training needed for it. You just try it out and kind of play with your mountain axe braking system. Now that we've covered the snow and the techniques, let's talk about the gear. So I've talked about this in another video, so check the link below, I'll put it somewhere, comparing micro spikes, crampons, yak tracks, and snowshoes. So in terms of gear for spring hiking, I always at least have traction and a mountain axe. So traction will either be micro spikes or crampons, and the mountain axe is just peace of mind. The traction on your feet is great, but if you don't have a way to have that third point of contact, it sometimes can be really sketchy and almost more dangerous in situations when you don't have something else, whether it be a hiking pole or a mountain axe. Speaking of hiking poles, some people enjoy those. Other people, like myself, I tend to not bring them. I might try to work them into my hiking arsenal here in the future, but if I've been doing it for this long without them, I don't know if my habit will change. In terms of clothes, layering is great, because a lot of times it'll start off pretty cold in the morning and then get really hot later in the day, so it's good to be able to shed those layers. Gloves and hat, also nice, just because my hands don't get cold easily, but I know some people do. One of the last things to talk about in terms of spring hiking is something I always stress, which is starting early. Starting early is good for a couple of reasons. Obviously, what we touched on earlier, which was avoiding some of the avalanche prone terrain before it gets too warm, but also from an enjoyment level. In the spring, the snow can get soft very quickly, and so you can be post-holing, which is basically when you take a step in the snow, sink up to your knee or higher sometimes, and it just really makes the day like very unenjoyable, especially if you have to do it for miles and miles. So starting early is a good way to avoid that as well. So that's about it. So in terms of spring hiking, those are really kind of my main takeaways. If you're looking to get out here, you know, obviously it's a different type of hiking, but with the right experience, the right gear, and the right training, you can really extend your hiking season and enjoy these beautiful views like we have up here on the summit of Mount Yale. Unbelievable stuff here. So anyway, thanks for watching. Please subscribe to not miss any future hike videos. Give this video a comment if you found it helpful, or if maybe I missed a tip that you've picked up along the way for spring hiking. See you next time. Thanks again for watching.